So my name is Professor Pointe, and my colleague David Eichenholtz is here in the audience, and he'll be speaking in a moment. And we're speaking, as Ellen said, about genocide. And of course, genocide is not a lighthearted topic. Genocide is the attempt to kill a group in whole or in part. It may be a national group, a racial group, an ethnic group, or a religious group, but the focus is on the killing of a group. And people have asked me over the years, why do I teach genocide? What is it about this very heavy topic that would lend itself to my interest? And I tell them about a time when my wife and I had an opportunity to visit Cambodia. Are you familiar with Cambodia? A nice country in Southeast Asia. And that invitation to go to Cambodia came from an organization known as the Documentation Center of Cambodia. That organization invited my wife and I and a colleague from Rutgers to come over, fly to Southeast Asia, and to assess a project that they had been putting together that was designed to provide psychiatric care and counseling to the people of that nation. And this was about 10 years ago. And that nation had a big problem with trauma. And when we went there, I would estimate that about 90 or 95% of the people in Cambodia suffered from what we call PTSD, and you know what I mean. Our goal was to travel around the countryside and to talk to people who had lived through a genocide that took place from 1975 until about 1979, a 4-year period. And during that time, about 2 million people in Cambodia, roughly 25% of the entire population of that country, perished in what has come to be called the killing fields. Have you heard that term before? Have you seen the movie? So we went over to the country, and we were not entirely prepared for what we were about to encounter. What happened in 1975 was radical in the extreme. There was an organization called the Khmer Rouge, also known as the Red Khmer. And this organization had been inhabiting the countryside in Cambodia for decades and waging a kind of low-level war against the US-backed regime in the capital, Phnom Penh. It was led by a general named Lon Nol. Well, when the Khmer Rouge succeeded in storming the towns and the cities, and when finally in 1975 they took control of that country, they began to institute what can only be called the most radical program in social engineering ever conceived by man. Radical in the extreme. The Khmer Rouge, the Red Khmer, had it in their minds that they would roll back the clock. And they literally wanted to begin over from year zero. They declared it now in Cambodia in 1975 to be the new year zero. And at that moment, they began to systematically erase and eradicate every institution associated with modernity in the country. Their goal, somehow, believe it or not, was to purify the nation and return the whole country to a pre-industrial era where everybody would be focused on agriculture. And so they set about, systematically, I say again, to dismantle all of the nation's institutions. They blew up their own banks and declared money illegal. They closed all of the monasteries, and many of the monasteries they turned into torture chambers because the walls were thick and they could muffle the screams of the victims. They made school illegal, and they executed everybody that they could find who was wearing eyeglasses because they associated eyeglasses with learning, and in their paranoia, they feared anybody who was literate. The Khmer Rouge also abolished the family. They took children and put them in charge of the parents and forced everybody to live out in these collective farms, out in the countryside, far away from the town or the city. In fact, they de-urbanized the entire country and forced everybody in April 1975 to get out of town and walk to the countryside. De-urbanized the entire country. Well, This pursuit of purity, as you may imagine, led to, as I mentioned, about a 25% loss of the total population in a period of only 4 years. And it's a lesson for us to learn about the idea of purity, about the quest for absolutes and certitude and conclusiveness. Because in the case of the Khmer Rouge, that pursuit of purity, which is shared by many genocidal regimes, such as the Holocaust and the genocide of the Armenians during World War I, is a dangerous pursuit. Well, as you can imagine, 4 years later, many of the people who did manage to survive ended up traumatized. And we came in to take a look and to assess the program called the Victims of Torture Program that the Documentation Center had put into motion. And so we drove around the country, my wife and I, and a Cambodian team, and also our colleague from Rutgers. And we visited with some of the victims who somehow managed to survive that horrendous period. And we also visited with some of the perpetrators who committed these terrible acts and who nonetheless lived freely among their victims. Nobody, with one exception, nobody has been prosecuted and jailed in Cambodia for what happened in the 1970s. Everybody lives freely in the shadow of the prisons over which they presided among the very population that they persecuted. So at one point, we were asked to drive out and meet one of these guys. And we knew that he was a notorious figure. His name was Doik. And Doik presided over a camp that had become an extermination center, a place called Krang Tachang in Cambodia. And we had visited the camp before we went to see Doik, and we could tell that even in the remnants of the camp, what was left behind, that terrible things had occurred there. Even the grass was a little bit too green, the rice fields a little bit too fertile to be beyond suspicion. So, after visiting the remnants of this camp, we drove in the SUVs out to see Doik himself. And you can imagine my surprise when we arrived at his dwelling. He lived in a little hut on stilts common to Cambodia. Because when we got out of the SUVs and we started to walk across the rice field to meet this guy, he saw us coming and he smiled and he waved and he appeared to be very happy. And the Cambodians who we were with, they got out of the SUV and they smiled and they waved at Doik and they appeared to be pleased to see him too. And I couldn't believe it. I wondered why. Why would they want to see this guy? After all, they knew what he did. They documented it. Well, as we walked over to Doik's dwelling, his wife went inside and his little boy too, who was playing out in the yard. And she brought him out a nice clean shirt, and I watched as Doik took his pen and he put it in his pocket of his shirt. And the Khmer Rouge, they liked to use pens because the pen was emblematic of modernity, which they clearly, in their savagery, lacked. And Doik came out and he spoke with us and joked around a little bit, and he seemed perfectly pleased to see us. Now, of course, we asked him, why did you perpetrate such terrible deeds? Why did you preside over the killing of so many of your fellow countrymen? Everyone who died was also Cambodian. And Doik, he never admitted to what he had done, of course. He understood that he wouldn't be prosecuted, but he doesn't want to admit to it. Instead, Doik spoke about the Cold War. He talked about the context in which the genocide unfolded. He discussed the way in which American bombing campaigns aimed at destabilizing the Ho Chi Minh Trail in the American war effort against North Vietnam ended up swelling the ranks of the Khmer Rouge by making it impossible for peasants to continue to live in the countryside. He spoke very much about the context in which things occurred, but he did not take responsibility for what he had done. That was not a surprise. And as the sun was setting over the rice fields and the sky was turning a beautiful violet, and you see these palm trees standing in a very solitary way in the distance, we got up to leave and we said goodbye to Doik. And the Cambodian team that we were with, once again, they seemed to like Doik. And we left and we went back to the car, and I said to them, why do you like this guy? You know what he did. And they said, well, yeah, but he's got a good sense of humor. He has a nice wife. He has a child out in the yard. He takes care of his child. And I thought about this over the years. And it seems to me that this encounter provides at least two possible lessons for why we teach genocide. And one of them, I think, is rather clear. We can see in the monstrosity of what Duch did to his own people the need to safeguard and to keep secure our own sense of humanity. We understand that we need to protect our humanity in the face of this monstrosity. But the other lesson also may be even somewhat more profound, because we see in Duch's humanity the notion that he has a wife and a child and a clean shirt and a pen. We see in his humanity the possibility that we too, given the context, are capable of doing monstrous deeds. And I think that therein lies the centrality and the importance and the significance of what it means to teach genocide. Genocide is not something that happens spontaneously. It's something that has a kind of logic to it. It unfolds in a context. It has steps and stages and procedures. And it reminds us over and over again of the need to remain human. And my colleague will talk a little bit about the stages of genocide.
So as Tom and I work with history teachers at both the high school and middle schools across Bergen County, we try to bring them tools that they could bring across this information to their students. The genocide, particularly starting with the Armenian genocide, is a state mandate now. And the state doesn't really provide as much as we add to what we can give them so that these teachers can bring it across in a cohesive manner, that the students will really understand the impact of genocide. And the first tool we provided, the 8 stages of genocide, the first one being classification. All cultures have categories to distinguish them versus us, by ethnicity, race, or religion. The second stage is symbolism. We give names or other symbols to the classifications. Jews, gypsies, are classified in a certain way with symbols. Distinguish them by their dress, their cultures, their habits. But everybody does that, and everybody symbolizes other groups until it gets to the dehumanization, third stage. One group denies the humanity of other groups. They're equated with vermin, animals, and that takes away their dignity. So the dehumanization is the third stage, which then leads to organization. Genocide is always organized. It's well thought out. Extermination of millions, hundreds of thousands of people has to be organized. Usually by the state, militias, to provide deniability of state responsibility. Special army units, militias, are used to carry out the organized genocide. Brings us to the 5th stage of genocide, which is polarization. Extremists drive the groups apart. Hate groups broadcast polarization through propaganda. Laws may forbid intermarriage and social interaction. Which brings us to stage 6, preparation. Victims are identified and separated out. This is the horror stage. Their ethnicity or their religious identity, the trains that you've seen in the Holocaust. Their property is expropriated, often segregated into ghettos, deported, which leads to 7, the ultimate extermination. Mass killings, legally called genocide. It is this extermination. The killers do not believe that they are really fully human people that they're exterminating because they've already classified them as vermin or animals. And then what always follows is stage 8, the denial. The 8th stage always follows. Among the surest indicators of further genocidal massacres, perpetrators of genocide dig up mass graves to eventually find that these genocides have taken place. So the ugliness of the 8 stages, to drive home that point to their students, to let them know how organized and thought out these horrible acts are. We take it to the next step, and we're not original in our thinking, but certainly we do bring home an idea that's been bounced about. To allow these students to understand genocide, where so often they think, well, that was either far away or long ago, and how do I really understand that? And the parallels to the stages of bullying are what drive that home. And it's not so much the extreme sense of bullying that brings about genocide, but to see some parallels certainly can call attention to the students and give them something that they can identify with better. The first stage in bullying, there's 5 of which, bullies watch and wait. You typically choose someone smaller and weaker than themselves. Person may be of a different culture, race, or religion. There's the parallel. Second, bullies test out the waters with their victims. They may interact with them, engage their response. The interaction is normally minor, includes such things as pushing them in a corridor or something like that, making fun of their body shape. Another parallel to the genocide stages. The bully then in stage 3 steps it up a notch. The child will realize that the bullying is purposeful and upsetting, purposeful. Another parallel stage to genocide. 4, bullying gathers momentum. The perpetrators will take advantage of this and begin to bully more and more as it builds, just like it starts to take a life of its own in genocide. Another parallel. And then bullying is fully established. The child will live in torment. Bullies will harass him or her at school, classroom. And although it thankfully doesn't lead to extermination, we've heard the sad stories of the bullied committing suicide, taking their own life in some manner, withdrawing from society, or whatever else they may choose as a result. Others have pointed out this dark parallel, to which it's helpful to point out to students something that they can relate to when trying to give them an understanding about the horrific acts as genocide. There's no way that this should be used to allow a bully in the classroom to think that, well, someday you're probably going to carry out a genocide against the population that you've come against. So that is not our mission. But hopefully with those tools, to be able to point out those parallels, to drive it home with something that the students can see near and unfortunately not so dear to their hearts, they'll get a better understanding of genocide. Thank you.